The Honourable Government House Leader.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given what happened earlier today, I would like to inform the House that notwithstanding, there will not be any ministers, the Finance Minister statement at 4 p.m. today.
Honourable point of order, the Honourable Member from Perth Wellington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As you would know, that was an order of the House that the Minister is trying to unilaterally withdraw. I seek the guidance from you and the table whether a Minister of the Crown can withdraw a unilateral order of this House to prevent the government from making a statement. I'm looking for your advice, obviously, Mr. Speaker, that the government, due to their own disorder and chaos, can now unilaterally withdraw an order of this House of such magnitude, Mr. Speaker.
Good point.
Thank the Honourable Member. Comme il est 16 heures.
It being 4 p.m., pursuant to order made Wednesday, December 11, 2024, I am required to interrupt the proceedings to permit the Minister of Finance to make a statement.
Given the information provided by the Government House Leader to the House, indicating that the Government does not intend to proceed with the statement at this time, the remaining provisions of this motion cannot take effect. That is, the period reserved for questions and comments and the replies from the various parties which are dependent on the statement being made. Puisqu'aucune déclaration ne sera...
In the absence of a statement, the House will resume the business that would normally be before it at this time.
Orders of the day, ordre du jour, but I will go to points of order.
That is why we are here. This can't be countermanded by the government itself. Parliament must be respected. And, Mr. Speaker, you must uphold the motion that was adopted unanimously by this House.
Here.
I see that the Honourable Member for Sanis Gulf Islands is rising on her feet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this is not to make the same point as my honourable colleague for New Westminster Burnaby, but given that it was a moment where the Speaker had to stop at 4 o'clock and seek the presentation, I suggest to Mr. Speaker, we're in a really difficult quandary here as opposition party members. We were given access on a confidential, embargoed lockup basis to read the document which we now are not to hear. Am I allowed to talk about the document that isn't happening?
Good question.
There is no other opportunity for parliamentarians to find out just how bad the books are. But I go back to the point as to the fact that the government themselves initiated this agreement. The government committed to opposition parties that it would happen today. And so I ask you, Mr. Speaker, the fact that they are in chaos is not the problem of parliamentarians. It is a problem for Canadians, but it is not a problem caused by Canadians, and they have a right to know exactly what's happening with their tax dollars. And now for the government to come in at literally the last minute and pull the carpet out of an economic update is unbelievable. It is not the actions of a serious G7 NATO partner country. So at the very least, Mr. Speaker, I ask that you find the government in contempt of the House order that was passed by all members of this place.
I will recognize the Honourable Member from Calgary, Bow River. I see that the Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons is rising on her feet.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 32, I have the honour to table in both official languages the Fall Economic Statement 2024.
I see that the Honourable Member from Perth Wellington is rising on his feet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now that the fall economic statement has been tabled, I believe we do now proceed to questions to the Minister. So I'd like to ask the government to stand in this place and tell us exactly how big the budget deficit was last year. How much did they blow past the $40 billion? Is it a big deficit or is it a super duper deficit?
Order. The difficulty that the chair finds itself in is that the motion is a permissive motion. The minister chose not to make a statement by which the rest of the order doesn't follow. But I'm going to be listening to a number of honourable members to hear about this. The honourable leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I must admit that I am totally shocked, flabbergasted that I have to rise in the House of Commons to announce this government's deficit. Normally, they would be the ones announcing their own deficit in their economic statement. But they tabled the fall economic statement without speaking to it. There's no finance minister who will dare to even talk about this fall economic statement. There's a new finance minister who's running off to the Governor General's residence instead of doing his work. We have had 3 different finance ministers today alone.
The government has finally revealed its true deficit number. Remember, this finance minister, this outgoing and now former finance minister, told the world that she was putting in place guardrails to limit the damage that her deficits could do. Her deficit plan was $40 billion, a mind-bogglingly large number that was already contributing to rekindling inflation again. This $40 billion was too big. It was out of control as it was. But at least to her credit, she said no more than that. And she decided she would have a guardrail. We know a guardrail is meant to stop vehicles from flying off cliffs. Well, as she was trying throughout the year to avoid going off the cliff, there were 2 people on the bus who had other ideas. The Prime Minister and carbon tax Carney. And the 2 of them went to the front of the bus, they grabbed the wheel, they pulled it sharply to the left, smashing into that guardrail, and she tried to resist. So they pulled even further to the left, and they stepped on the gas. The bus flew off the cliff, and now Canadians are at the bottom of the ravine in a big pile of debt. But instead of taking responsibility, the Prime Minister told her that she should take all the blame. That when the ambulances and the police cruisers arrived, and the fire department, that she take the blame for running the bus off the cliff, and that carbon tax Carney and the Prime Minister could innocently sit back, and that the Prime Minister could then put carbon tax Carney in charge of driving the next bus. The good old boys in the back room would protect themselves and make the finance minister, the then finance minister, take all the blame. Reminds you of the way they treated the former Attorney General, a brilliant and brave First Nations woman who refused to kowtow to corruption. It reminds us of the way they treated Jane Philpott and so many other brave women who have dared question this self-described feminist Prime Minister, some feminist indeed, throwing the bus off the cliff and throwing women under the bus. That is his real record. That his real record on finance, Mr. Speaker, is yet another $62 billion deficit. For context, outside of this government, there is no government in the history of Canada that has ever run a $62 billion deficit. Not even in the 90s when the Wall Street Journal said that we were a third world basket case, not even during the massive global economic crisis did the deficit come anywhere close to that. And here we are, with the global economy growing, with the American economy booming in stable times. This deficit is 100% at the feet of this irresponsible Prime Minister and his personal economic advisor, carbon tax Carney. That's right. Now, Carney says he doesn't even want the job of finance minister. He doesn't even want to try and drive the crashed out bus after he helped run it off the cliff. And they couldn't find anyone all day. In fact, no one will appear today even to defend this incredible disaster of a budget. Look at the consequences in human terms, Mr. Speaker. We have 1,400 homeless camps in Ontario, 35 homeless encampments in Halifax alone. We have 2 million people lined up at food banks. Scurvy is making a comeback. The government admits that 1 in 4 children are going to school hungry every single day. Unemployment is rising, and according to this budget, expected to exceed 7% by the end of next calendar year. The gap between per capita GDP in Canada and the US is now 30,000 in Canadian dollars, 30,000 it was equal 10 years ago. This is the worst gap since at least the Second World War, and some say the worst gap in a century. Canadian workers are only getting 55 cents of investment for every dollar an American worker gets. $500 billion Canadian investment dollars, which works out to almost a quarter of our economy, has left net to go to the United States, where it builds pipelines, factories, warehouses, pipelines, business centers, Canadian investment dollars paying American wages, while our workers go starving for investment and for salaries to pay their bills. When I travel across this country, I consistently meet 2 types of people. One, those who are a little better off and tell me that, and I'll be very blunt about this, that if I don't win, they will leave the country. And they are very numerous. Yes. But you know, I don't worry about them as much. You know who I worry about? The ones who can't leave. The ones who don't know, and if I can just use very blunt language, who tell me, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. I have no idea how I'm going to pay my way. That's right. I met a waitress at a restaurant not long ago, and she came up to me and she grabbed me by the hand and she said, "You have to win." And I said, "Oh, thank you, I appreciate your support." She said, "No, it wasn't a compliment. You have to win." And then she told me her story. She told me that she was working 1 full-time job and 2 part-time jobs just to pay her bills as a single woman in her late 50s. And she was tired of working all the time. So she cut everything out of her budget, every creature comfort, everything she enjoyed about her life, she cut it out so that she could drop one of those part-time jobs. And then one morning, she woke up and she walked outside and her car was gone. And she called her insurance and they said they weren't going to cover the replacement value. So she had to take that job back because she simply cannot live her life without a car. Now you can bet your bottom dollar the guy who stole the car, he was probably out on bail. This was not his first job.
That's right.
Her taxes have gone up. Her heating bill has gone up. Her wages have not gone up. She's scared to go out in the streets in places where they didn't even lock the door not long ago. These are the people we're fighting for. These silly games over here, they're very entertaining. The soap opera that everyone's seized with today, that's all fine. But there are real people whose lives are on the line here, and we have a duty to work for them. And quite frankly, this woman doesn't see me as any, or any of us as any kind of savior. They see us all as a last hope. In fact, she doesn't want to be saved. She just wants her life back.
Yeah, exactly.
She was taking care of herself just fine before her tax, her heat, her grocery bill went through the roof and her car went missing. She was doing just fine. She was doing everything right. Met another guy at the Le Brat Brewery a few days ago, and you can watch the video of me talking with him. He walked up to me and he said, "I have 3 jobs and I can't make it. We're renting. We have no hope. We've given up on ever owning a home. We're renting. We can barely make it." And he said to me, "I feel ashamed when I talk to my kids because they ask me why I'm never around and why we can never have a house. And I feel like a failure." But he didn't fail. He has been failed.
That's right.
He has been robbed of the promise of Canada. It was a very simple promise, that if you worked hard, you got a good life. Now, it wasn't fancy or extravagant, but you got a house with a yard where you could have kids playing safely. And you could have a nice dog that you could afford to feed along with the kids. And your kids could play safely in the streets. That was the promise. Now, politicians break promises all the time. But you know what was bad about this promise? This promise didn't belong to this Prime Minister. It wasn't his promise to break. It belonged to all of us. And our purpose is to bring home that promise for that young man, that young father, and that older female worker, so that they can once again take back control of their lives, live in a safe country where their hard work earns them a good wage, where their rent and their food is affordable, and where when they go to bed at night, they know that they will be safe throughout their sleep and that they will have their car in their driveway in the morning. A country where people are proud again to fly the flag, where they know the government is a servant and not a master, where they understand that every day the Commons, this place, works for the common people, not for the ego of one man desperate to cling on to his job. We must remember that we are servants in this place. We have a job to do on behalf of the people who sent us here. Our personal dramas are not important. The dramas that should seize all of our concern and imagination are the daily dramas of the working women and men that build this country. We are in it for them. We're going to give them back control of their lives in the freest country on earth, Canada. Let's bring it home.
Hey, come on, get up, lad.
Before we move to question and comments, pursuant to Standing Order 38, it is my duty to inform the House that the questions we raise tonight at the time of adjournment are as follows. 1, carbon pricing, the Honourable Member for Bow River. And 2, the Honourable Member St. Albert Edmonton on democratic institutions. Questions and comments.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, you know, there is no one more so than the Leader of the Conservative Party that both inside the House and outside the House tries to portray a false impression that Canada is broken, Mr. Speaker. The reality is Canada is the best country in the world to call home. We can do a worldwide tour where you will see that whether it's interest rates, whether it's inflation rates, that Canada is virtually second to no other G7 country. And when you think of things like foreign investment, we are third in the entire world in 2023, Mr. Speaker. To the Leader of the Conservative Party, Canada is not, in fact, broken. And I would remind him that he sat around a cabinet table with Stephen Harper, where Canadians sent a very resounding message back in 2015, where a third party took over as the government of the day because his government back then was such a disaster.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, everything is broken today. Absolutely everything. And 70% plus Canadians agree with me on that. The borders are broken. We have 500,000 people here illegally, according to the government's own documents. The immigration system is broken. We now have refugee camps, something we only used to see in third world countries that are being set up across our country in formerly tranquil and peaceful suburbs. Our drugs and disorder have broken our communities. We've lost more people to drug overdoses in the last 9 years than died fighting for Canada in the Second World War. Absolutely everything is broken after 9 years of this pathetic Prime Minister who's right now hiding under his desk.
Here, here.
The honourable member from Vancouver, Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I agree with a lot of what my honourable colleague said in terms of his description of how difficult it is for many Canadians. I don't know that I would say everything's broken, but I'll tell you a lot of people are broke. A lot of families are struggling. 50% of Canadians living paycheck to paycheck. 1 out of 4 parents are skipping meals to feed their children. So my question is to my honourable colleague, the NDP proposed giving those people an immediate cut by permanently removing the GST off life's essentials like home heating, on all grocery items, on cellular and internet bills, on diapers. But he voted against that. So if he thinks everything's broken and he truly believes that people are struggling right now, why did he vote against the NDP motion that would have given people an immediate 5% break on life's essentials?
That's right.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I find it incredible that even when there is no Liberal minister willing to defend the temporary 2-month GST tax trick, the NDP is there to defend it for them.
Yeah.
Here we have a tax trick that will cost more to administer than it will save anybody, that many vendors are not even implementing, and that will be gone before it starts. And you have the NDP talking, but this is the NDP. That member has
Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Vancouver Kingsway, who had the opportunity to ask a question, to please hold the microphone, hold his place until he's recognized by the Speaker again to speak. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The member wants me to tell the truth about the permanent tax change. Well, there is a permanent tax change he has supported, which is to jack up the carbon tax on absolutely everything. He's voted to quadruple that tax to a eye-watering 61 cents a litre that would literally grind our economy to a halt. It would take food off grocery shelves. It would take parts out of factories. It would shut down the farm vehicles that bring us our food. It would be a nuclear winter if that tax increase that he has voted to legislate into place ever happens, and that's why we need a carbon tax election so that I can axe the tax.
Questions and comments?
Senator Golf-Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's so rare that the Speaker's rounds get around to Green Party to put a question to the Leader of the Official Opposition. So I want to have this opportunity. I want to start by saying there was nothing in his statement with which I could disagree, because it vaulted us into a frenzy of patriotism. I love this country. There's no place in the world I would rather live than being Canadian. But the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition also maybe gave us a chance to get to know him a bit better. What would he do instead? He mentioned he'd met a waitress. He's known me a long time. I was a waitress. I waitressed for more than a decade, couldn't afford to go to university, but only in Canada was it possible that for me to go to law school as a mature student. I want to ask the honourable member, since I didn't join a political party until I was over 50, what jobs has he held in real life outside of politics that make him think he could be Prime Minister?
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I'd be happy to talk about the jobs, Mr. Speaker. My first job in here was to help pass the Federal Accountability Act to crack down on the corruption that we've seen on the Liberal side. Then I helped cut the GST so that Canadians could save when they made every single consumer purchase, 7 to 6 to 5%. Then I worked with Prime Minister Harper to help balance the budget and to rebuild the military so that we would have necessary equipment to help destroy Al-Qaeda after the attacks of 9/11. Helped deliver the lowest inflation of any government in 40 years, leaving behind a balanced budget and the best balance sheet of any government in the G7. In fact, it turns out the job experience I have is best aligned with the job that I promised to do. Now let's bring it home.